152 years back, in a very inhospitable terrain, a new country evolved. The country today boasts of having the largest and the number of people who believe in it. In the morning when I wake up, the messages of Happy Canada Day seem to be flooding. And this day needs some introspection, some heart searching. The country with unlimited natural resources, known for its compassion, known for its doing good and feeling good attitude. Is it a country? Not today. It is deemed to be a country geographically, but emotionally and culturally, it's still not one country. As a matter of fact, I call it a nation of strangers, the people who don't know each other. Culturally, it's not that. I remember meeting Douglas Coupland at one time, and he described British Columbia as a part of cultural Chile, a West Coast community that ranged from San Diego to Prince Rupert Islands, tied together with an integrated economy and a common worldview. This resonates with the people who are new and who have more in common with their homelands. Can you imagine an Ontarian having something common with a Montreal, where he has never been there? And there are cultural communities that run southeast into the United States. It's less important than what they do. And then there are solitudes. Can you believe it? Hardly 10% of the Canadians have ever visited the north. They go for a vacation. Can you believe, again, my question, and it's a loaded question. There are more people who will visit Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Panama, than they would visit north or the west. And the reason is simple. There are few cultural similarities between, say, Newfoundland and Saskatchewan. And while there are much more likely similarities between Belgium and France. The moment I crossed from France to Belgium, I didn't feel I'm going to a different country. But I go to Quebec and I feel, well, this is a different world altogether. Go to Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, an absolutely different world. Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister, once called Quebec a nation. Justin Trudeau announced indigenous communities as a nation. Maybe a future Prime Minister may continue the trend and some critical advantage of calling Maritimes a nation. Or South Asian Canadians as a separate nation. And why not? No one has ever successfully argued that Canadians are a people that say many things. The bogey of the multiculturalism divides the people into ghettos. The ghettos can be cultural, the ghettos can be social, the ghettos can be economic, but they are ghettos all the same. And it's shocking when the present Prime Minister says there's no core identity in Canada, there's no mainstream in Canada. When the Prime Minister of a country says there's no core identity, that clearly shows that that country is not a country. That's not a nation. It's an assemblage of nations. It's an assemblage of communities. You do not have to brag about being multicultural, the way Canadian politicians are in the habit of doing. So it's nauseating. When I came to Canada for the first time about 20 years back, somebody said, well, this is a multicultural country. And then I asked him, are you sure that this is the first or the only multicultural country? And he said, yes. I said, no. There are multicultural countries galore, and practically every country today in the age of globalization is multicultural. I gave him the example of India. I told him, in Canada, you have 2 national languages. In India, there are 26 national languages. There's hardly a religion which is not finding expression in India, and nobody calls minorities Pakis or towelheads or ragheads. The people accept others. The acceptance is common. You don't have to talk about when you accept others. You talk about when you are not sure of accepting others. And it's increasingly difficult to call Canada a state or a country. And it's a very difficult thing to do. Being a Canadian citizen, it does not permit you to write, to work or study in another province. Imagine you are a Canadian. You are a chartered accountant, or you're a lawyer, or you're a doctor, or you are even a plumber. And you're living in Ontario. Do you know you can't go to Quebec and work as a plumber or a chartered accountant or a lawyer? Or even as an engineer? Isn't it ridiculous? Globally, you can go and work. There'll be no hesitation in accepting your qualification. But here, you cannot go to the other province. Normally, the inter-provincial barriers for the trade should not be there. Here they are galore. And when there is a barrier on restrictions of work, when there are barriers on the restrictions of trade, that country loses its reason d'etre to be called a country. Some definitions of state refer to having a monopoly on violence, the violence to protect yourself. We meet that criteria in only one Canadian military. But the Canadian military is no military at all. The Navy is no longer able to assert sovereignty on the maritime boundaries. And Army doesn't even make an attempt to be in Arctic. What country is it which cannot protect its borders? And it has to depend on USA. Excuse me, please. Just a second. What country is it that depends on a neighbor to protect its sovereignty? Then either you are a colony, admitted or implied, but you are not an independent country. You are not a sovereign country. I do not deny that Canada is great, and I'm proud of it. And we are used to saying that world needs more of Canada. We love to revel in our progress as a post-national state. We are not a nation state. And today the time is for the nation state. When Modi says made in India, or when Trump says make America great again, or when China says that Xi says that China is a superpower, when Austria, Romania, Ukraine, Russia, even Britain leaving Brexit, these are all expressions of nationalism. And here we are not talking of nationalism. We either talk of being Ontarians and Albertans and Saskatchewans and Newfoundlanders, or we talk of the citizens of the world. There's no middle ground. And the Canadian national concept is missing. Canada is not a people, so we see. It's not a nation. It's not a nation state. So what are we? We are a community of strangers. We occasionally have a leader like we had way back Mackenzie King, the way we had Harper, that marshals us together, makes us together and walk in a certain direction with a certain. But that happened only occasionally and never for a long time. We remain the same color on the map, not because of some strong sense of shared identity or common purpose, but because there is no reason to split as yet. But there are murmurs of some provinces saying that they want independence, they want to secede. And imagine the quality of life is supposed to be the highest in the world. But are we happy? Canadians, by and large, do not come in the top 10 happiest nations of the world. They come in high standard of living. Now, there's a difference between a higher standard of living and greater happiness. And, I was once consoled by a counselor saying that a marriage requires successful effort to find connection. Have the 10 provinces and the territories found sufficient connection to be together and to be happy together? If that were so, then the limitations, that fiscal barriers and the non-fiscal barriers would not be there. Linguistically, is a nation divided. Every party, whether it's liberal or conservatives, or whether it's NDP, they have two faces, hypocritical. One, smiling while looking towards Quebec, and at the same time winking at the rest of Canada. It exactly reminds me of that action of Rahul Gandhi, the leader of opposition in India, when he went, embraced the Prime Minister and winked at the people as he's saying, well, be happy, I'm just trying to fool him and fool the nation. And this is what the politicians of Canada do. They do not have the guts and gumptions to say that the Quebec demand for sovereignty was a misconceived one. Every government rules with an eye on the Anglophones because the Anglophones elect them, but one eye is always towards the Francophones. When the language divides, the nation is in peril. A more accurate way would be not to call it a country, as I said, but call it a nation of strangers. Every region, every province sits in isolation. A Canadian in Prince Edward Island and one in British Columbia may speak a similar language, but they're divided by far more than their accent. And can you believe only 15% of the Canadians live outside their province where they were born? Only 15%. This is amazing. Canadians are not mobile people, they never were. And another thing, they have to take vacation, they don't go to another province, as I said earlier. An Ontarian would go to Florida and Miami rather than going to Vancouver or Jasper or Banff Island. Why? Because they don't see the connectivity. Look at comparison in USA. 30% of the Americans leave their state of birth. 30% of the US students stand out of the state college, while only 10% of the Canadian students have ever left their home province. And as I said earlier, they don't even vacation in the country. More than 40% Canadians, this was the Pew Research Center, believe that federal government is irrelevant to them. When the federal government becomes irrelevant, the nation, please, the nation loses its cohesiveness. The country loses its cohesiveness because the connectivity is through the federal government. Your promises can be very important. The municipalities can be very important, but they have different functions. And here, under liberals and also under some of the conservatives, there has been a very delinquent attitude on the part of the federal government. So what to do? We can't wish the problem away. It needs a concerted effort. You need to refocus on the Canada Service Corps. You need to refocus on the youth, tax credits, give tax credit for attending the school outside the province. Let the people meet. Try to build stronger people-to-people connections so that this nation of strangers becomes a cohesive country, strongest in the natural resources. It has capability of being number one in the world. Why is it not that? G8 status we have not because of the achievement of our politicians, but because of the courtesy of de Gaulle of France, who wanted to extend the sphere of influence of France so that Quebec could become one day become independent. So it was basically an underhand action aimed at spoiling Canada. But then we deserve to be G. We deserve to be in G3. We deserve to be in G2. And we are not there. If not because of our incapacity to exploit our natural resources, and properly we should not, we should conserve them. We as one of the largest aid givers should have a sphere of influence which rivals USA and China. We are not there. We are not there in the top 15 countries whose word is heard to. Our passport is very strong, but our influence, diplomatic influence, is zero. Otherwise, China could not have insulted Canada and the rest of its citizens. Saudi Arabia could not have kicked out us. Ambassador, this calls for rethinking, especially on Canada Day. I wish all of you a happy Canada Day, but at the same time, I wish that all of you do some heart searching, some soul searching, and endeavor to make Canada, number one, a country, and number two, a great country which it deserves to be, but for the myopic attitude of the politicians. Thank you.